In the summer of 63 BC, a Roman senator named Marcus Livius stood shivering in the Roman Forum, clad only in a transparent linen tunic, nearly naked before thousands of Romans who had once called him colleague and friend. His senatorial shoes had been removed. The toga that symbolized his status as a citizen of the highest rank had been stripped away. His hands were bound behind his back, and a wooden horsebit was stuffed into his mouth, preventing him from speaking in his own defense. A herald stood beside him, reading from a scroll that listed Marcus's crimes: embezzlement, bribery, betrayal of the Senate's trust. With each charge announced, the herald paused, and a man wielding a many-tailed whip studded with metal pieces struck Marcus's back. The crowd counted each lash 1, 2, 3. By the 10th lash, Marcus was weeping openly. His humiliation was complete even before the physical punishment truly began. By the 20th, he was on his knees. By the 30th, he was incoherently begging through the gag for a mercy that would not come. Marcus Livius survived that day. The flogging was not meant to kill him, but to destroy something more important than his body: his dignitas, his honor, his social existence as a Roman noble. It succeeded completely. Within a week, Marcus committed suicide, not because of the healing wounds, but because he could not bear to continue living in a world where thousands had witnessed him reduced to something less than human, less than a man, someone who wept, begged, and broke down. This was not an exception. This was Roman justice. This was the fate of those who transgressed the social order in a civilization that believed honor was more valuable than life itself, that believed humiliation was a more effective punishment than execution, and that believed destroying a person's reputation and dignity was the most thorough form of justice. This is a story about the most terrifying public humiliations in ancient Rome. These are not the neat deaths you see in movies: noble self-minus, inflicted wounds, or dignified poisonings. These were punishments specifically designed to strip away everything that made a person Roman, everything that gave them identity, status, and humanity. These were rituals so brutal that even Romans themselves sometimes question whether they went beyond the crime. They are also testimonies preserved in historical records from people who experienced or witnessed humiliations considered worse than death itself. Before we continue, I need you to understand what you're about to hear. The Romans documented their methods of public humiliation in legal texts, historical chronicles, and the works of philosophers who debated the ethics of these punishments. The sources exist. The practices I will describe are all recorded in ancient documents, though I will use composite characters to make what the records report but don't fully explain comprehensible. If you want to understand how honor-based societies exert social control through systematic shaming, how punishments were engineered to destroy identity and not just the body, then subscribe to this channel now. Hit the subscribe button, and in the comments tell me where you're from and whether your culture has inherited notions of honor and shame from ancient traditions. Now, let's go back to the time of the Roman Republic to understand why humiliation was seen as the ultimate weapon. Roman society, especially in the late Republican early empire, was organized around a complex system of social status, honor, and public reputation. A Roman's identity was not primarily individual in the modern sense, but relational, defined by how others saw and treated you. Your dignitas, your honor and standing, depended on maintaining the respect of your peers and the deference of your inferiors. Lose that respect and deference, and you effectively cease to exist as a social being, even if your physical body lived on. The concept of dignitas was not abstract, it manifested in concrete aspects of daily life. A Roman elite with high dignitas received priorities, seating at public events, respectful greetings in the street, had his opinions carry weight in Senate debates, could expect favorable treatment in legal disputes, and had access to networks of patronage, offering economic and political opportunities. All of this depended on maintaining honor, on being seen as worthy of respect. For the Roman elite, especially senators and equites, knights, honor was tied to several factors. Your ancestors and family name were paramount. Romans kept detailed genealogies and could recite the achievements of their forebears for generations. Someone from an ancient patrician family had inherited dignitas, fuile, novus homo, A new man whose family hadn't held high office before had to work much harder to earn it. Your wealth and property were also crucial. Romans expected the elite to display wealth appropriately, not through conspicuous consumption seen as vulgar, but through public donations, sponsorship of games and festivals, building public works, and maintaining an impressive household. A senator who fell into poverty would lose dignitas, regardless of his family background or past achievements. Your military achievements and public service added to your honor. The Romans revered military courage and success. A man who had successfully commanded armies, won battles, and celebrated triumphs gained immense dignitas. Public office also brought honor. Election to the consulship, the highest office, marked the peak of a political career and conferred permanent status. Your behavior and personal relationships mattered. Romans expected the elite to keep their word, properly maintain relationships with their clients, show appropriate deference to superiors, while maintaining dignity among peers and displaying proper authority over their subordinates. A man who broke faith, abandoned his clients, or acted obsequious lie before his peers would lose dignitas, even if his wealth and ancestral status remained. Perhaps most important was your ability to command respect through gravitas, that quality of seriousness and dignity a Roman elite was supposed to project on all occasions. A senator who lost gravitas, who was publicly mocked or humiliated, who showed weakness or lost self-control, could not survive in Roman society. Other senators wouldn't take him seriously, the people wouldn't respect him. His political career was over, his family's reputation tarnished. In many cases, the dishonored man chose suicide, believing it preferable to living on with permanent disgrace. For ordinary Romans and slaves, honor functioned differently but was no less important. Free Roman citizens, even poor ones, possessed rights slaves did not. They couldn't be tortured or subjected to certain degrading punishments without a trial. They could appeal to the tribunes for protection. They could vote and participate in the assemblies. They had legal standing to bring suits and defend themselves in court. These rights marked them as part of the Roman citizen body, as people who belonged to this community. Punishments that stripped away these markers of citizenship, treating a citizen like a slave or a foreigner, were profoundly shaming and socially destructive. For free citizens, honor was also tied to professional standing and reputation within their community. Craftsmen took pride in their work and their standing among their peers. Merchants valued their reputation for honest dealing. Soldiers valued their courage and loyalty to their unit. Even poor Romans had a sense of personal honor and dignity that could be attacked through public shaming, being mocked in the street, forced to beg publicly, subjected to punishments usually reserved for slaves. All of these destroyed a free citizen's sense of worth and belonging. For slaves, honor was even more fragile. Slaves had almost no legal protections. They could be beaten, tortured, assaulted in various ways, or put to death at their masters' will with little legal consequence. But even slaves had some concept of personal dignity, some sense of self-worth that a master could target for destruction. Punishments designed to shame a slave, to make them feel worthless and broken, were seen as more effective for maintaining control than mere violence. A slave successfully shamed, who had internalized their own worthlessness, was less likely to rebel than one merely beaten, but with spirit intact. The Roman state understood all of this. Roman law and custom developed a sophisticated system of punishments designed not just to inflict pain or cause death, but to destroy honor and reputation, serving as both deterrent and public display of state power. These shaming rituals served multiple functions, simultaneously punishing the individual who violated social norms, reinforcing the hierarchies of Roman society by showcasing the fate of those who challenged the social order, providing entertainment for the masses who relished watching the mighty fall, or criminals and slaves suffering, creating a shared public experience that bound Romans together through the collective witnessing of justice being done. Understanding these functions helps explain why Romans invested so much effort in elaborate public humiliation. Simple execution could achieve the goal of removing a criminal from society, but it couldn't provide the same powerful deterrent effect, the same intense reinforcement of hierarchy, the same level of public entertainment, or the same depth of community bonding. Romans weren't just punishing a criminal, they were performing social order, showcasing in a visual and memorable way how that order was maintained and what happened to those who violated it. Let me provide you with context for the punishments. I will describe by explaining one of Roman society's most important concepts: virtus. This word is often translated as virtue or manlines, but its meaning is more specific and complex than either English word. Virtus was the quality that made a Roman man a man. It included courage in battle, the willingness to face danger without flinching, and included self-control, the ability to master one's emotions and desires rather than be ruled by them. It included the power to command others, to dominate and to make people obey, and most crucially, it encompassed inviolably the quality of not being dominated or violated by others. A man with virtus could not be dominated. He was an actor, not a passive recipient. He gave orders, did not grovel to receive them. He imposed his will on others, did not have his will suppressed. His concept of virtus was tightly linked to Rome's social and military hierarchies. In battle, the virtuous Roman soldier fought bravely, dominating the enemy. In politics, the virtuous senator commanded respect and influenced decisions. In household management, the virtuous paterfamilias, head of household, controlled his family, slaves, and clients with firm authority. The concept of virtus was also tightly linked to Roman ideas about the body and physical violation. The body of an elite Roman male was considered inviolable in certain specific ways. His body was not to be penetrated, touched without permission, or subjected to treatment that implied subordination. This inviolability was expressed through various social customs. Elite Romans maintained physical distance from inferiors. They did not allow themselves to be jostled in crowds. They expected others to make way for them in the street. Uninvited physical contact from an inferior was considered presumptuous. Violating this bodily inviolability, whether through violence, forced intimacy, or other forms of physical degradation, was profoundly shameful and could destroy a man's virtus. This is why so many of the most devastating Roman humiliations involved forcing an elite man into a position of physical vulnerability or submission. Having one's body violated, treated like that of a slave or a woman, rather than a free elite male, meant losing virtus, ceasing to be a true Roman man, becoming something shameful and contemptible. Women had a different relationship with honor and faced different expectations. Elite Roman women were expected to embody which included modesty, chastity, and proper female conduct. Woman's reputation depended on hers, actual morality remaining chaste before marriage and faithful within it. But PUDICDA also included proper conduct in public, avoiding behavior that drew undue attention, maintaining a dignity befitting her family's status, and acting in ways that brought credit to her husband and family. Within gender constraints, elite women also had avenues to honor and respect. They could be recognized as exemplary wives and mothers. They could earn respect for efficiently managing large households. They could gain admiration for religious piety and participation in female religious rites. Some elite women, particularly from very powerful families or those who controlled significant property as widows, could exert considerable indirect influence on politics and business through male relatives or connections. But a woman's honor was always more fragile than a man's. A false accusation of adultery could ruin a woman's reputation, even if unproven. Being seen alone, with a man not a relative, could raise questions about her virtue. Any hint of improper sexual conduct was socially devastating. This vulnerability meant that punishments for women often involved the destruction of their PUDICDA, whether through actual violation or through rituals that implied their impropriety. A woman whose PUDICDA was destroyed could not return to her former social position. She was utterly ruined, unable to marry respectably or maintain relationships with elite families. Lower status women, including slaves and freed women, were held to different standards. They were not expected to maintain the same level of PUDICDA as elite women. In fact, Romans assumed lower minus status women are likely to be promiscuous or engage in sexual commerce. But even these women had some notion of honor and shame. Being forced into situations that were degrading even by the standards of their own class, subjected to public ridicule or assault, treated as completely worthless, could be psychologically devastating even for women not expected to attain the same dignity as a matrone, respectable married woman. With this background on Roman honor culture, virtus, and Judea and the complex hierarchy of status and dignity established, we can now examine the specific methods of humiliation the Romans developed and deployed. I will describe 8 broad categories of shaming punishment, each designed to destroy a different facet of Roman identity and honor. I will use composite characters built from fragments in the historical record to show what these punishments meant on a human level. The first category of punishment we need to examine is the one documented as the tunica molesta combined with public confession and flogging. This was used primarily for elite men convicted of betraying public trust, especially senators and officials found guilty of corruption, embezzlement, or treason. The punishment was not execution, but the systematic, multi-stage destruction of honor, stripping away every marker of elite status and replacing them with marks of disgrace. Let me tell you the story of Senator Marcus Livius, whom I mentioned at the beginning. Marcus is a composite character based on accounts of several senators from the late Republic who endured similar humiliations. His specific story blends elements from multiple sources to illustrate how this punishment worked in practice. Intas had been a senator for 15 years, elected to offices through family connections, a military career on the Germanic frontier, and careful cultivation of political allies. He owned property in Roman Campania. He had a wife from a respectable family and 3 children. He wasn't exceptionally wealthy or powerful, but he was reliable, respected, someone the Senate could count on for sound judgment and a reliable vote. He attended Senate meetings regularly, sponsored modest games during his aedileship, properly maintained relationships with clients and patrons. By all visible measures, Marcus embodied the dignitas expected of a Roman senator. But Marcus made the mistakes that would ultimately destroy him. He accepted bribes from contractors seeking public works projects. The amounts weren't enormous, but significant enough to make a real difference to his finances. He used the money to pay off debts incurred from living slightly beyond his means, to buy better furnishings for his townhouse, to sponsor slightly more lavish games than he could otherwise afford. He told himself what he was doing wasn't really corruption. Everyone took such gifts. He was just being pragmatic about the realities of Roman politics. He also embezzled funds meant for the grain owed to the poor. Again, the amounts per instance weren't huge, but over a few years it added up to a substantial sum. Marcus diverted the funds to various personal expenses, always planning to pay it back eventually, but never actually doing so. He told himself the grain distributions wouldn't really be affected. Shortfalls could be made up from other sources. The poor wouldn't really notice the difference. But Marcus's crimes were discovered. The prosecutor, eager to make a name for himself, began investigating anomalies in the grain distribution accounts. He traced the missing funds to Marcus and found evidence of the bribes. Marcus was brought before an ad hoc court established to investigate senatorial corruption. He tried to defend himself, arguing the charges were exaggerated, that he'd made bookkeeping errors rather than intentionally stolen, that the prosecutor was motivated by personal animosity rather than a concern for justice. The court was unconvinced. Multiple witnesses testified to paying the bribes. The accounting records clearly showed the embezzlement. Marcus's defense was weak. He was found guilty on all counts. The legal punishment was not death. It was a public humiliation designed to warn other senators who might be tempted by similar corruption. The punishment began with Marcus being summoned to the Forum on market day, when it would be thronged with thousands of people. He was ordered to appear wearing his senatorial toga, the garment symbolizing his rank and status. The white woolen toga with its purple stripe was the most visible symbol of a senator's dignitas. Wearing it, Marcus could walk through Rome commanding the respect and deference his office demanded. But he wouldn't wear it for long. When Marcus arrived at the forum, he found a large crowd already assembled. Word had spread that a senator was to be publicly punished, and Romans loved such spectacles. They relished seeing the mighty fall, enjoyed the entertainment of public humiliation, and felt the collective sense of judgment these events created. Marcus made his way through the crowd to the designated area, aware of thousands of eyes upon him, aware that what was about to happen would be witnessed, remembered, and discussed by thousands. A herald stood on a raised platform. When Marcus reached the spot, the herald began to read the court's sentence in a loud, clear voice that carried across the forum. Marcus Livius, senator of Rome, having been convicted of crimes against the Roman people, namely accepting bribes and embezzling public funds designated for the grain dole to the poor, is hereby stripped of his hair, dignados, and subjected to public castigatio. The word used was castigatio, implying corrections, reform, not mere punishment, though everyone understood the real purpose was shaming and deterrence. The herald finished, and licetors approached Marcus. These were public slaves who carried out punishment. They were not gentle. One grabbed Marcus's toga and began pulling it off him. Marcus instinctively tried to resist, grabbing at the garment, but the licet, or roughly yanked it from his grasp. The toga, the garment symbolizing Marcus's citizenship and rank, was removed and cast aside. The crowd watched the stripping with interest. Some jeered, others watched silently, waiting to see what would happen next. Next, the licetors removed Marcus's senatorial shoes, the special reed leather, telkii, that marked him as a member of the Senate. These shoes were another visible status symbol. Only senators wore such shoes. Removing them reduced Marcus from senator to ordinary citizen, depriving him of the visual cues that commanded respect. Stripped of these visual symbols of commanded respect, Marcus stood wearing only his tunica interior, the basic under-minus tunic worn by all Romans regardless of status. But this wasn't enough. The licetors brought a special tunic documented as the tunica molesta, the troublesome tunic or tunic of molestation. This garment was designed specifically to humiliate. It was made of linen so thin it was nearly transparent, offering almost no coverage. When Marcus was forced to remove his regular under-minus tunic and put on this tunica molesta, his body was exposed to the view of everyone in the forum. Romans could see the outline of his body, details that should have been decently covered. For an elite Roman male, this exposure was profoundly shameful. Elite men were expected to be modest in public, to keep their bodies covered except in appropriate contexts, like the baths, where nudity was expected and normal. This involuntary exposure, especially before social inferiors, including women and slaves, was feminizing and degrading. Elite Roman men controlled who saw their bodies and in what context. To be deprived of that control, forced to display oneself before thousands, including those he would normally command and dominate, implied an inversion of the normal social order. Marcus stood there, knowing thousands of people, including women, slaves, and ordinary citizens, were looking at his near-minus naked body, judging it, mocking it, seeing him in a state of vulnerability that destroyed the gravitas he had cultivated for years. The physical vulnerability suggested a metaphorical vulnerability, the loss of male inviolability that Virtus demanded, but the humiliation was just beginning. Nael, Isidore handed Marcus a scroll and ordered him to read it aloud to the assembled crowd. Marcus took the scroll with trembling hands. Unrolling it, he saw it contained his own confession, written in clear language listing each crime he had committed, leaving no room for ambiguity or excuse. He had to describe his own corruption in his own voice before thousands of witnesses. This forced confession served multiple purposes. It affirmed the legitimacy of his conviction, making clear the punishment was deserved. Not arbitrary, it created a permanent record in the memory of thousands of witnesses, who would remember not just that Marcus was convicted, but that he himself admitted it. It deprived him of any possibility of later claiming innocence or arguing the verdict was unjust. Most importantly, it forced Marcus to participate in his own destruction, making him complicit in the ruin of his own honor. He wasn't just being punished, he was being forced to condemn himself. Marcus began to read in a voice hoarse with emotion. Marcus Livius, confess to the Roman people that I have betrayed the trust placed in me as a senator. I accepted bribes from contractors seeking public works projects and embezzled funds designated for the grain dole to the poor. I used these stolen funds for personal gain, to maintain a lifestyle I did not deserve, to present a false appearance of wealth and success. I've betrayed my fellow senators, betrayed the Roman people, betrayed the honor of my family and ancestors. I deserve what is coming to me. Marcus had to pause several times during the reading to compose himself. His voice cracked. Tears streamed down his face. He had to stop to wipe his eyes before continuing. The crowd listened at first in silence, savoring every word of his confession. Then someone shouted an insult: "Thief, traitor, corrupt dog." Others joined in. By the time Marcus finished reading the scroll, the forum echoed with the sound of thousands of Romans jeering at the senator who had betrayed them. This collective mockery was itself a punishment, proof that Marcus had lost the respect of the people he had once served. Amid the jeers, Marcus was led to the whipping post erected in the center of the forum for public punishment. The post was wooden, thick and sturdy, set deep into the stone pavement. Near the top were iron rings. Marcus's still-minus trembling hands were eyed with rope. The rope threaded through the rings, pulling his arms over his head and forcing him to stand on his toes. The position was immediately uncomfortable and would become agonizing as the punishment continued. I seat or approached with a wooden gag, similar to the kind placed in a horse's mouth. This gag was forced between Marcus's teeth, the wood pressing painfully against his jaw, secured by a strap around the back of his head. This gag served two purposes. It prevented Marcus from biting his tongue during the flogging, which could cause him to bleed to death, interfering with the goal of keeping him alive to fully experience the humiliation. But more importantly, the gag prevented Marcus from speaking, from begging for mercy, cursing his tormentors, or saying anything that might allow him to retain a shred of dignity. He could only make animalistic sounds, grunts and moans, muffled by the gag, unable to form words. A man skilled with the flagrum, the many-minused bailed whip, positioned himself behind Marcus. Flagrum was a whip designed specifically for this type of punishment. It consisted of a handle attached to several, often 3 or 4 leather thongs about 2 feet long. Each thong ended in small pieces of metal, lead or bronze, shaped to tear flesh. Flagrum was not designed to kill, but to inflict maximum pain while keeping the victim alive. The multiple thongs distributed the impact over a wider area than a single lash, reducing the risk of fatal damage by making it less likely the same spot would be hit repeatedly. The metal tips would tear the skin, causing intense pain and bleeding, but usually not penetrating deeply enough to cause lethal injury. The herald announced Marcus would receive 30 lashes. This number was severe enough to be impressive and painful, but not so high as to risk killing the victim. The lashes were counted publicly. With each strike, the herald called out the number 1. The first lash landed on Marcus's shoulders. The thin tunica molesta offered no protection. The thongs and metal tips bit into his flesh, tearing both fabric and the skin beneath. Marcus's body jerked against the ropes. A scream, muffled by the gag in his mouth, emerged. 2. The second lash landed slightly lower on his upper back, where skin tore. Blood began to trickle down Marcus's back, soaking the transparent tunic, making it cling to him. 3, 4, 5. The flogging continued at a steady rhythm. The man wielding the flagrum was experienced, methodical. He knew how to pace the blows to maximize pain without causing unconsciousness or death. He varied the angle and placement of each stroke slightly, avoiding concentrating damage in one area. By the 10th lash, Marcus's back was torn in multiple places. The blood was now flowing down his back and legs, dripping onto the stone flags of the forum. He was screaming continuously now, a dull, throaty sound, a moan of pain he could neither control nor suppress. His body thrashed violently within the ropes binding him. He pulled uselessly at his restraints, instinctively trying to escape the inescapable pain. By the 20th lash, Marcus was visibly weakening. His legs could no longer properly support him. He hung from the ropes binding him to the post, his full weight on his bound wrists. The crowd continued to count along with the herald, their voices becoming a collective chant: 20-1, 20-2, 20-3. Some in the crowd seemed to be enjoying it, cheering with each stroke. Others watched with grim satisfaction, believing justice was being done. A few looked uncomfortable but did not leave or protest. By the 30th and final lash, Marcus was completely broken. Only the ropes held him upright. His back was a mess of torn flesh and blood. The transparent tunic was now completely soaked with blood, clinging to his body, making the wounds visible. His face was contorted with agony. Tears and mucus streamed down his face, mixing with saliva leaking from the edges of the gag. Then, as the herald announced the completion of the 30 lashes, Marcus lost control of his bladder. Urine streamed down his legs, mixing with the blood pooling on the stone flags. This loss of bodily control was deeply significant. Elite Romans were expected to remain composed even under extreme stress. Self-minus control was a fundamental aspect of virtus. A man was supposed to master his body, not be mastered by it. Crying in public was acceptable only in very specific contexts, like funerals where emotional display was expected and appropriate. But losing control of bodily functions, wetting oneself like a child or an animal, was profoundly shameful. It implied weakness, a lack of self-minus mastery, an inability to maintain the dignity expected of a Roman man. Marcus's public breakdown, his screams, his tears, his loss of bodily control confirmed what the punishment was meant to prove: he was not a man of virtus. He was weak, corrupt, unable to maintain the self-minus control and dignity expected of a senator. Everyone who witnessed his breakdown would remember it. Every time they saw him afterwards, if they ever saw him again, they would remember the senator who cried and lost control under the lash. That memory would be permanent, definitive. After the 30th lash, the lic Torzent eyed Marcus from the post. He collapsed immediately to the ground, unable to stand. His legs wouldn't support him. His back was torn and bleeding. He lay on the stone flags of the forum, gasping for breath in an expanding pool of his own blood and urine, the gag still in his mouth. A lic or removed the gag and tossed it aside. Another lic or threw a bucket of water over Marcus, washing off some of the blood and urine, cleaning him up just enough that he wouldn't leave too much of a mess as he left the forum. Then came the final humiliation of the punishment ritual. Marcus was told to leave the forum, but he was not permitted to walk upright. He was forced to crawl on all fours like an animal, while the crowd watched and jeered. When he crawled too slowly, licors kicked him. As he passed, people spat on him. Some threw rotten food or filth. Children ran alongside him, shouting insults and mockery. Senator crawled the entire length of the forum from the whipping post to the exit, while thousands of Romans witnessed his degradation. This crawling completed the destruction of his status. He exited the space of Roman public life, not as a senator walking tall with the gravitas his office demanded, but as something less than human, as an animal or a slave, broken, defeated, reduced to the most pitiable state. The image of Marcus, bloodied, broken, covered in his own filth, crawling across the forum, would become the enduring memory Romans associated with his name. Marcus survived the physical punishment. His wounds were severe but not life-minus threatening. Over the following weeks, his back began to heal. The torn flesh scarred over. The pain gradually subsided. But Marcus did not survive socially. The destruction of his stigmatas was total and irreversible. Other senators avoided him. They would not speak to him in public. When they passed him in the street, they would not acknowledge his greeting. His political allies abandoned him, not wanting to be associated with a man so publicly shamed. His wife's family pressured for a divorce to protect their own reputation from the stain of Marcus's disgrace. His children faced mockery at school from other elite children who had heard their parents talk about the senator who was flogged, who cried, who crawled across the forum. Marcus tried for a few days to continue his normal life. He went to the baths, to the forum, tried to maintain social connections. But Everywhere he went, he felt the stares and heard the whispers. People pointed at him, made comments loud enough for him to hear. That's the senator who stole from the poor. That's the one who crawled like a dog across the forum. Marcus realized the life he knew was over. He could never recover his lost dignitas. The rest of his existence would be as an object of contempt and ridicule. 7 days after the flogging, Marcus slit his wrists in a bathish. He left no note, but everyone understood the reason such a life was not worth living for a shamed ex-senator. Death was preferable to permanent disgrace. His family buried him quietly with minimal ceremony. No eulogy was given. No one praised his achievements or mourned his passing. He died in dishonor, and the dishonor followed him even into death. His name became a cautionary tale other senators would invoke when discussing corruption. Don't end up like Marcus Livius, they would say. Don't betray your office and face the lash. If you're listening to this story and understand that Roman society was built on a system of honor and shame that could be weaponized to destroy a person without killing them, that psychological destruction was seen as a more thorough form of punishment than simple execution, then please share this video. Hit the like button to help others find this content. In the comments, tell me what you think about honor-based systems of justice. If they more brutal or more merciful than modern punishments focused on incarceration? Can psychological destruction as punishment ever be justified? Does your culture still have elements of honor and shame inherited from ancient traditions that function in similar ways? Let me know your thoughts. And now, let me tell you about an even more elaborate humiliation ritual, the preparations leading up to the execution known as the execution known, pone colle, the punishment of the sack. This is a punishment whose bizarre nature sounds like medieval legend, but which is explicitly documented in Roman legal sources. The pone colle was Rome's most infamous method for executing parricides, those who killed a parent or close relative. The punishment involved sewing the condemned into a leather sack along with a dog, a rooster, a snake, and a monkey, and throwing the sack into a river to drown. The strange combination of animals was symbolic. Each represented qualities. The parricide had violated the dog for loyalty, betrayed his dog's worst symbols of loyalty to masters, the rooster for the dawn and new life cut short as the parricide shortened a life that should have continued, the snake for hidden evil, the secret venom that kills from within, the monkey for the mimic of humanity, a creature like a human but lacking human virtues. But less known is that the pone colle execution was the endpoint of a multi-day systematic process of humiliation designed to break the condemned before death and provide a public spectacle that reinforced social norms about family loyalty. The days leading up to the execution were filled with rituals that stripped the condemned of their identity as Romans, transformed them into beast-like, subhuman beings, and only then put them to death. Let me tell you the story of Gaius Publicius, a composite character built from several documented cases of parricide from the late Republic and early Empire. Gaius was 32 when he killed his father over an inheritance dispute. The murder wasn't premeditated. It happened during a heated argument that had been escalating for months, fueled by his father's refusal to give him access to family funds. The argument grew intense, both men shouting. Gaius's father said something particularly cutting about Gaius's failures as a son. In a rage, Gaius struck his father with a heavy bronze lapsmint. The blow was meant to hurt, to shut him up, not necessarily to kill. But Gaius's father fell badly, striking his head on the corner of a stone table. He was dead within minutes. But the result was the same as if Gaius had planned the murder meticulously. His father died by his hand. Under Roman law, this was parricide, the most abominable crime imaginable, because it violated the basic structure of Roman society. Soon, paterfamilias, the male head of the household, held absolute authority over his family. His word was law within the household. For a son to raise a hand against his father was to challenge the most fundamental principle of Roman social order. If a son could kill his father with impunity, if the authority of the Athea, paterfamilias, could be violated, then the entire structure of Roman society was threatened. Gaius was immediately arrested by neighbors who heard the argument and came to investigate. He was brought before an ad hoc court set up to handle parricide cases. These cases were treated with special seriousness because of what they represented. The trial was brief. Multiple witnesses had heard the argument. Several saw Gaius strike his father or arrived immediately afterwards to find Gaius standing over his father's body. Gaius's guilt was undeniable. He tried to argue it was an accident, that he hadn't meant to kill, that the punishment should reflect the lack of premeditation. The court was unsympathetic, intent mattered less than outcome. The father dead by his son's hand was parricide, and parricide demanded the harshest punishment Rome could devise. The court sentenced Gaius to death by peine école, but the execution was scheduled for 3 days later. Those 3 days would be filled with rituals designed to strip Gaius of his identity as a Roman, transform him into a beast-like, subhuman being, and only then kill him. The goal was not just to execute Gaius, but to make his execution a public spectacle to deter any others who might be tempted to violence against parents or the paterfamilias. On the first day after sentencing, lictors came to Gaius's cell in the public prison. He had spent the night in darkness, chained to a wall, contemplating his fate. The lictors brought items that marked the beginning of his transformation from Roman citizen to condemned beast. First, they stripped Gaius of his clothes, his tunic and sandals, any items marking any status. They gave him sculp 1ae, to wear cheap shoes carved from a single block of wood, without leather or decoration. These wooden clogs were significant. Free Romans wore leather shoes or sandals. Slaves might wear wooden clogs if they wore shoes at all. The clogs marked Gaius as less than a citizen, less than a free man, reduced to the lowest status. The clogs were also deliberately ill-fitting and heavy, making walking difficult and clumsy. Gaius would suffer, not walk with the dignified gait expected of a Roman man. Next, the lictors brought the most visually striking element of the transformation, a dog-skin mask, made from the pelt of a dog, fur included, shaped to cover Gaius's face completely. The mask had eye holes, but small ones, limiting Gaius's vision. The mouth hole was smaller, restricting his breathing and making speech difficult. The mask smelled of the animal from which it was made, a constant reminder to Gaius of the transformation he was being forced to undergo. When the lictors pulled the mask over Gaius's head and secured it with leather thongs, his human face disappeared. He looked like some hybrid creature, half-man, half-beast, which was precisely the intended effect. The symbolism was clear. By killing his father, Gaius had forfeited his humanity. He had acted like an animal, violent and lacking the rational self-control that distinguished men from beasts. Now he would be treated as an animal, visibly marked as no longer Roman, no longer human, no longer worthy of basic human dignity. Wearing the dog-skin mask and wooden clogs, Gaius was led out of his cell and into the streets of Rome for the first public humiliation ritual. Herald walked ahead of him, holding a sign and loudly proclaiming his crime for everyone nearby to hear. Gaius Publicius parricide, condemned to the peine école, for killing his father. The herald repeated this proclamation as the procession moved through densely populated areas, ensuring as many Romans as possible saw the condemned man and understood what he had done. The parade route was carefully planned to maximize witnesses. It wound through the suburb, a densely populated district of ordinary Romans living in multi-story apartment buildings. Thousands of people came to windows or into the streets to watch. They jeered, shouted abuse, spat at Gaius. They threw rotten food and filth, putrid vegetables, the contents of chamber pots, anything insulting they could find. Parents encouraged their children to taunt the parricide, to shout abuse, to throw small stones that wouldn't cause serious injury but added to the pain and further humiliation. The parade lasted for hours, winding through the suburb, then to the Forum, then through other major streets and neighborhoods. By the end, tens of thousands of Romans had witnessed Gaius paraded through the streets in a dog-skin mask and wooden clogs, covered in filth and surrounded by jeers. The mask prevented Gaius from defending himself, even from seeing clearly where he was going. He stumbled several times in the clogs. When he fell, guards kicked him, hauled him roughly to his feet, forced him to keep moving. He was not allowed to rest or to wipe away the filth covering him. He was a displayed object, not a person who might have needs or dignity. On the second day, Gaius was brought to the forum for another public ritual. This time, he was forced to drag the actual leather sack that would be used for his execution across the forum. The sack was brought from storage and placed in the forum specifically for this purpose. It was made of thick, heavy leather stitched together, cylindrical, large enough to hold a man and the 4 animals that would accompany him. The sack weighed perhaps 30 or 40 pounds, heavy enough that dragging it across the stone pavement required considerable effort. Still wearing the dog-minus skin mask and clogs, Gaius was ordered to drag the sack from one end of the forum to the other and back. He struggled with the heavy weight. The mask made it hard to breathe, and the physical exertion quickly exhausted him. The crowd watched and laughed. This preview of his manner of execution allowed Romans to contemplate what would happen to Gaius, to imagine him being stuffed into that sack with the animals, to picture him drowning in the Tiber. The physical struggle of dragging the sack reinforced the impression of Gaius's weakness, his inability even to perform this simple task with dignity, confirming he deserved the fate awaiting him. After dragging the sack across the forum, Gaius was forced to undergo another ritual that completed his separation from Roman society. He was ordered to prostrate himself before a statue of his murdered father, brought temporarily from the family home and set up in the forum. The statue was a small bronze bust, normally kept on the family altar where ancestors were venerated. Now it served as the focus for a ritual of disownment. Gaius had to lie face down in the dirt before the statue while priests performed a formal ceremony. These were priests specifically concerned with rituals related to family and ancestors, religious experts who understood the sacred nature of the paterfamilias as authority. The lead priest recited the traditional words established for the specific purpose. This man is no longer a Roman. This man is no longer a son. This man has no family, no name, no place among the living. He is, as Azer, outside the bonds of human community. We cast him out from the fellowship of ancestors and descendants. We deny him memory and honor. We erase him from the family records as if he had never been born. This ritual disownment had profound significance in Roman religious and social thought. Romans believed that criminals who violated fundamental social norms needed to be formally expelled from society before execution. Merely killing them wasn't enough. They had to be declared non-human, stripped of identity and relationships, rendered nothing before being destroyed. It reflected the Roman concern with proper classification and social order. In Roman society, everything and everyone had their assigned place. The social structure depended on everyone knowing their place and fulfilling its duties. A parasite had so thoroughly violated their place that they had to be reclassified as non-human before the punishment could proceed. The ritual also had legal consequences. Once Gaius was formally declared to have no family, his property would not pass to any heirs but be confiscated by the state. His name could not be carried on by descendants. His memory could not be honored. He would be completely erased from family records, as if he had never existed. This total erasure was part of what made parricide punishment so severe. It wasn't just about the individual's death, but the utter obliteration of his entire existence past, present, and future. On the third day, the execution itself arrived. Gaius was led from his cell one last time to the banks of the Tiber, where the thon echo lay would be carried out. A large crowd had gathered. Executions were public entertainment in Rome, and the end of the thon echo lay was especially notorious. People wanted to see this unusual punishment with their own eyes, to witness the fate of a parricide. The dog, rooster, snake, and monkey were brought to the execution site. Each animal had been captured or purchased specifically for this purpose. The dog was a large mongrel, likely a stray caught by animal catchers. The rooster was a common barnyard fowl, agitated from being caged. The snake was a venomous one, dangerous and unpredictable. The monkey was the most expensive element, likely imported from Africa or Asia, the high cost of this execution method reflecting the importance Romans placed on this particular form of punishment. Gaius watched as Lysidores placed each animal into the leather sack. The animals were confused and frightened, being placed into an enclosed space without understanding what was happening. The dog went in first, barking and snarling. The rooster was put in next, clucking and flapping its wings. The snake was dropped in quickly, the snake handler not wanting to risk a bite. The monkey went in last, shrieking and trying to climb out before the sack opening was tied. Then it was Gaius's turn. The dog minus skin mask was pulled from his face. For the first time in 3 days, Gaius could see clearly. The crowd could finally see his face, see the fear as he realized what was about to happen. He was forced to strip completely naked, removing even basic undergarments. Lictors grabbed him, forced him into the sack with the animals. He tried to resist, struggling and pleading, but several strong men easily overpowered him. He was pushed into the sack, his body pressed against the terrified animals. The opening of the sack was sewn shut with thick leather cords. Skilled workers with heavy needles worked quickly, sealing the sack completely, ensuring Gaius could not escape. The process took only a few minutes. Then, the sealed sack containing Gaius and the 4 animals was lifted by several men and carried to a bridge. At a signal from the presiding magistrate, the men heaved the sack over the side of the bridge into the Tiber below. The sack hit the water with a teal ash. For a moment, it floated, buoyed by the air trapped inside. Witnesses standing on the bridge and along the banks reported hearing sounds from inside the sack, muffled screams and struggles as Gaius fought in the dark of the sealed sack with the animals. The dog, panicked by the water and confined space, likely attacked anything it could reach. The rooster would scratch and peck frantically. Snake would bite. The monkey would scratch and shriek. The 5 creatures in the sack fought for survival in a hopeless situation. The sounds continued for several minutes, a horrible muffled cacophony of pain and terror. Some in the crowd watched intently, others looked away, disturbed themselves by witnessing this slow death. Gradually, as water seeped in through the stitches and the struggle inside used up the available air, the sack began to sink. The sounds grew weaker, then stopped. The sack disappeared beneath the surface. Gaius Publicius was dead, drowned in the dark while being torn by panicked animals, the fate Roman law and tradition prescribed for a parricide. The execution was designed to be as psychologically cruel as it was physically. The condemned experienced total disorientation inside the sealed sack. Seeing nothing, unable to tell up from down, they felt pain from multiple sources, attacked by animals that were themselves terrified and fighting for survival. They experienced the gradual realization that death was inevitable but would come slowly, that they would suffer before drowning finally ended their agony. Importantly, there was no body afterwards to bury with dignity. The sack would not be retrieved. Gaius's remains would be washed downstream, consumed by river creatures, or simply rot in the water. He had no grave, no tombstone, no place for his family to remember him. He was obliterated in life, death, and memory. The pone and its associated humiliation served as a powerful deterrent. The multi-day public spectacle ensured everyone in Rome witnessed the fate of a parricide. The bizarre and horrific nature of the execution made it memorable. People told stories of the pone for generations. Parents used it to frighten disobedient children. See what happens to a son who doesn't respect his father. This is the fate awaiting anyone who violates the most sacred duty of family loyalty. The punishment reinforced the sacredness of patria potestas, the absolute authority of the father over the family. Roman society was organized around families led by male authority figures. The father had the power of life and death over his children, controlled family property, arranged marriages, made all important decisions affecting the household. This patriarchal power wasn't just social custom. It was a fundamental organizing principle of Roman civilization. Pone demonstrated that challenges to patriarchal authority would be met with the most extreme punishment Rome could devise. It also showed that some crimes were so heinous that regular execution wasn't enough. The criminal had to be dehumanized, expelled from society, and destroyed in a way that left no trace. Now, let me tell you about another category of humiliation that blended entertainment with punishment, creating some of the most disturbing spectacles in Roman history. These were the theatricalized executions and forced performances in the arena, what Romans called damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. This category reveals how Romans turned death itself into entertainment, how they used myth and theater to add layers of mockery and degradation to execution. Most people know Romans executed criminals in the arena, feeding them to beasts or forcing them to fight as gladiators, but less known is that many arena executions included elaborate theatrical elements designed to humiliate the condemned before death. Criminals were forced to play roles in mythological enactments, often humiliating or sexually violating roles, then executed as the climax of the performance. Let me tell you the story of Lucius Corvinus, a composite character built from accounts of theatricalized executions under emperors like Nero and Domitian. Lucius was a minor official's assistant responsible for tax collection, convicted of embezzlement. The sums involved were large. Lucius had been diverting tax revenues into his own accounts for years. When the theft was discovered and investigated, Lucius was sentenced not to simple execution, but to execution in the arena at the next public games. Lucius was told he would participate in a mythological performance, playing the role of Orpheus, the legendary musician who descended to the underworld to rescue his dead wife Eurydice. The story of Orpheus was familiar to educated Romans. His lyre playing was so beautiful it charmed beasts, trees, and stones. After his wife's death, Orpheus went down to the underworld and persuaded the gods of death to release her. But Orpheus violated the condition of her release, looking back at her before reaching the surface, and Eurydice was pulled back into death. It sounded almost dignified, playing a legendary hero and musician. Lucius was given a tunic to wear and a lyre, an instrument he had no idea how to play. He was led into the arena, where an elaborate set representing a forest had been constructed. Painted backdrops showed trees and rocks. Props created a mythic landscape. The audience watched from the stands, thousands of Romans enjoying the spectacle. Lucius was told to play the lyre and sing, as Orpheus did in the myth, to attract animals with the power of his music. He stood in the center of the arena, holding the lyre awkwardly, with no musical training or skill. He plucked the strings, producing discordant sounds. He tried to sing, but his voice, trembling with fear, came out as a weak, off-minus-key whimper. The crowd laughed at his incompetent performance. This was part of the entertainment, watching a condemned criminal desperately try to play a role he was utterly unsuited for. But the animals released into the arena were not docile or trained. They were bears and lions, large predators that had been starved for days to make them aggressive and willing to attack humans. When the gates opened and the animals entered the arena, they were not calmed or charmed by Lucius's music. They saw him as prey. A bear lumbered towards him. Lions circled, as fixed on his movements. Lucius realized what was happening. He tried to run, drop the lyre, abandon the pretense of the performance, but there was nowhere to run. The arena was enclosed. Guards prevented escape through the gates. The animals were faster than he was. The crowd cheered as they watched the bears and lions close in on Lucius. They cheered louder when the first bear reached him, swiping him to the ground with a massive paw. They roared approval as lions joined the attack, tearing into Lucius while he screamed and tried futilely to defend himself. The performance ended with Lucius being killed and partially eaten by the animals, while the crowd watched and enjoyed the spectacle. His death was turned into entertainment, his final moments spent in a humiliating charade, believing music might save him, that playing a role he couldn't possibly fulfill might somehow forestall a fate that was inevitable from the moment he entered the arena. Theatricalized executions were even more explicitly designed to humiliate and degrade. Criminals convicted of sexual or moral offenses were sometimes forced to enact myths involving degradation or violation. Historical sources mention performances where the condemned were placed in situations designed to mock and destroy any remaining dignity before being executed. One documented example involved a man forced to enact the myth of Pasiphae, the mythical queen who coupled with a bull. The condemned was placed in a wooden framework roughly shaped like a cow ball, designed to facilitate interaction with a real bull brought into the arena. The crowd watched this humiliating spectacle, combining violation with public mockery. After this humiliation, beasts were released to kill the condemned. The execution was packaged as justice, appropriate punishment for someone who violated moral standards, but it was also entertainment the crowd clearly enjoyed. These theatricalized executions served multiple purposes beyond simply killing the criminal. They provided more elaborate, more memorable entertainment than straightforward execution. They allowed Romans to watch mythological stories played out with real consequences. Bringing ancient tales to life in a visceral way, they shamed the criminal in a manner matching their crimes. Sexual offenders experiencing sexual degradation before death, they reinforced the idea that criminals were less than human, suitable only for public amusement before being disposed of. Women condemned to the arena faced particularly gendered forms of humiliation. Sources mention women forced to fight as gladiators while stripped or nearly naked, their bodies displayed for the entertainment and judgment of thousands of spectators. Women convicted of adultery or who had worked in brothels were sometimes subjected to what sources euphemistically call expositio, exposure, being placed in situations where they faced violation by beasts or other condemned criminals before execution. These punishments targeted specifically female the modesty and virtue that defined respectable womanhood in Roman society. Destroying a woman's sexual honor before killing her was seen as appropriate punishment for crimes involving moral or sexual transgression. The arena was also used to punish slaves who rebelled against their masters. After the suppression of Spartacus's slave rebellion in 71 BC, 6,000 captured slaves were crucified along the Appian Way from Rome to Capua. The crosses stretched for over 100 miles, a visible corpse every 100 feet or so. But before crucifixion, many of these slaves suffered theatricalized humiliation in arena performances. They were forced to fight each other to the death in mocking costumes that ridiculed their rebellion. They were forced to enact their rebellion as farce leaders dressed as mock kings with cheap crowns and wooden scepters, followers as mock soldiers with toy weapons. All of this provided entertainment for Romans before they were executed. These spectacles of humiliation and death were scheduled during major festivals and religious holidays. They were not hidden or private affairs. They were central features of Roman public life, drawing massive crowds that included children, women of all social classes, and elite families sitting in the best seats. The normalization of this brutal entertainment reveals something important about Roman values and psychology. Romans did not view criminals, slaves, or defeated enemies as deserving of the human dignity afforded to citizens. They saw them as resources to be exploited for the benefit and amusement of citizens. The suffering of the condemned was not regrettable or to be avoided. It was entertaining, satisfying to watch, an appropriate display of Roman power and justice. The more elaborate and memorable the suffering, the stronger the entertainment and deterrent effect. This ability to snack and socialize with friends while others suffered and died, to view horrific deaths as casual entertainment, is difficult for modern people to fully comprehend. But in Roman society, it was completely normalized. Children were taken to games from a young age and learned to enjoy them. Elite women discussed arena performances as social events, commenting on which gladiators fought well, which executions were especially memorable. Emperors gained prestige by sponsoring lavish games with creative executions. The arena was woven into the fabric of Roman social life, making this cruelty seem normal, even necessary for maintaining social bonds and proper values. Now, let me talk about one of the most taboo, rarely discussed forms of Roman humiliation, what some sources hint at with the word devotio, and more broadly understood as ritualized physical violation as punishment. This is difficult to discuss because sources are often vague, using euphemisms or indirect language to describe practices even Romans themselves found difficult to discuss explicitly. But there is enough evidence to reconstruct that physical and sexual assault was sometimes used as punishment, particularly for men convicted of treason, cowardice in battle, or other crimes implying a failure of masculinity. As discussed earlier, Roman masculinity was built on the concept of physical inviolability. A true Roman man was never the passive recipient of another's actions in ways that implied domination or submission. He was always the actor, the imposer of will, not the one whose will was suppressed. This inviolability extended to his body. Elite Roman men expected their bodies to be physically inviolable, not to be touched without permission, not to be subjected to treatments implying subordination or penetration. This meant that threatening or actually subjecting a condemned man to physical violation, particularly sexual violation that feminized him or reduced him to the status of a slave or a woman, was understood as one of the most devastating forms of humiliation. It destroyed male honor more thoroughly than beating or even execution, because it attacked the very core of what made a man a true Roman. Let me tell you the story of Sextus Aurelius, a composite character built from fragmentary sources about punishments for military cowardice and certain treason offenses. Sextus was a centurion, a mid-minus level officer commanding about 80 men in a Roman legion. During a campaign on the Germanic frontier, Sextus's unit was ordered to hold a position against a much larger force of Germanic warriors. The position was strategically important. If it fell, the entire Roman line could collapse. But Sextus panicked. When the Germanic warriors charged when he saw the size of the force attacking his position, Sextus made the decision that would destroy him. He ordered his men to retreat. They abandoned the position, fled the battlefield, taking his unit with him. His cowardice had immediate consequences. The Germanic warriors broke through where Sextus should have held. The Roman units were outflanked, suffered heavy casualties. The battle was ultimately won by Roman reinforcements, but Sextus's cowardice cost Roman lives and nearly lost the entire engagement. Sextus was arrested by Roman military police and brought before a military tribunal. His own soldiers testified against him. Officers described the consequences of his cowardice. Sextus tried to defend himself, arguing he made a tactical decision, that the position was indefensible, that retreat saved his soldiers from pointless death. The tribunal was unconvinced. Sextus had not been ordered to retreat, nor had he attempted to send for permission to retreat. He had simply run from fear, abandoning his post. That was cowardice, the most serious crime a Roman soldier could commit.